Adlai Stevenson II was born in Los Angeles on February 5, 1900, into an already famous Illinois political family. His maternal great-grandfather, Jesse Fell, was a close friend and advisor to Abraham Lincoln. Fell prompted Lincoln to write a short autobiography, which was used to promote Lincoln as a possible nominee for the presidency. Fell also encouraged the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which put Lincoln into the national political spotlight and helped lead to his nomination as a presidential candidate in 1860. Stevenson's paternal grandfather and namesake, Adlai E. Stevenson, was vice president to Grover Cleveland during Cleveland's second term. Stevenson's father, Lewis Green Stevenson, was Secretary of State for Illinois. This tradition of public service continued with Governor Stevenson's eldest son, Adlai E. Stevenson III, U.S. Senator from Illinois and Democratic candidate for governor. Stevenson studied history and literature at Princeton University and later worked at the Daily Pentagraph in Bloomington, Illinois, while earning his law degree from Northwestern University. Stevenson began his career in Chicago as a lawyer and held a number of different government positions. After World War II, he served as special assistant to Secretary of State Edward Stettinius Jr., and as senior advisor for the first General Assembly meeting. He mustered public support for the United Nations.
From the time we were born, we heard politics in our family. You know, our great-grandfather Fell used to ride over the muddy roads down to Vandalia, the early state capital, to lobby for the legislation he liked. He was a friend of Lincoln's. He helped organize the Republican Party. Our grandfather Stevenson, we heard politics in his house and in our home from the time I can remember. I think that Adlai's destiny was inevitable. I think he was meant to go into politics.
With a long family history and a desire to serve the people of the United States, it was no surprise that Stevenson would end up in politics. And so, in 1948, he ran against incumbent Dwight H. Green for governor of Illinois, and won by the largest majority in Illinois history up to that time, 572,000 votes. A larger majority than the presidential candidate Harry S. Truman that same year. This large win, along with the reputation he developed as governor of Illinois, led to his emergence in the national political spotlight. In 1952, the Democratic National Convention took place in Chicago, and Governor Stevenson was asked to give the welcoming address. Unlike the majority of candidates, Stevenson had not sought out the nomination himself.
I would not seek your nomination for the presidency because the burdens of that office stagger the imagination. Its potential for good or evil, now and in the years of our lives, smothers exultation and converts vanity to prayer.
But everyone was so moved by his speech that he was nominated on the convention floor. Stevenson's campaign for president thus began with no staff and no money. Throughout the 1952 campaign, Stevenson consistently demonstrated that he was a politician more concerned with discussing the real issues of the day than in ultimately winning the election. Stevenson saw the election as a process that would both educate the American public as well as the candidate.
Let's talk sense to the American people. Let's tell them the truth, that there are no gains without pain, that we are now on the eve of great decisions.
He eloquently voiced the issues of the day with honesty and conviction, despite the fact that some of his views were unpopular at the time.
Talking sensibly and honestly is not always easy. It means saying things that sometimes people don't like to hear. It means risking votes, and candidates are not supposed to do that.
In the presidential election of 1952, television had a significant impact on the accessibility of candidates to voters for the very first time. In 1948, there were roughly 3,500 television sets across the country, but by 1952, there were roughly 17 million. The Republican candidate, Dwight D. Eisenhower, took advantage of this new media outlet by running short television spots during popular television shows. Stevenson, on the other hand, did not consider the office of the president to be a commercial commodity requiring advertising.
Scene 4, 5, and 6. Take 1, track 43.
He did agree to use commercial spots in his campaign, but was never really comfortable with television, as he thought it limiting and often found himself cut off mid-speech.
To the new America, in which our abundance is used to enrich the lives of all of us. Oh, Nancy.
You were a big help, Doug.
Oh, I forgot. I forgot to deliver the groceries and made a speech instead.
Stevenson lost the 1952 election by a large margin to the heavy favorite and wartime hero Dwight D. Eisenhower, winning only 9 states, not even carrying his home state of Illinois. During the campaign of 1952, this photograph, taken by William Gallagher, became a lasting and defining image of Stevenson. It also became one of the most renowned political photographs in U.S. history, winning the Pulitzer Prize in 1953.
I love the governor of Illinois.
Stevenson was nominated a second time to run against incumbent President Eisenhower in the election of 1956. This time, Stevenson campaigned more aggressively from the beginning, promoting conservation issues and accusing Eisenhower of being a part-time president.
Their batting average is one of almost complete opposition to every forward step America has taken.
Stevenson still maintained his earlier views on what was becoming of the presidential election process.
Are America's long-term programs for meeting these problems of lesser importance than winning this election? Is this only a battle that we have before us? Do the tactics of winning it justify false fears, false promises? Is it all right to count the American people too ignorant to understand? Are no long-term answers necessary? Is it just bread and circuses? And if there has to be an answer, is it to offer fairness and justice?
Say, Johnson, what's this you've got on your lapel?
Stevenson.
Eisenhower.
Despite his efforts, Stevenson lost by an even larger margin to President Eisenhower this time around, carrying fewer states and still not carrying his home state of Illinois. Stevenson stated he was glad to even come out second. Although Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a close friend and avid supporter, wanted Stevenson to run again in the election of 1960, he did not seek out the nomination. The nomination went to then-Senator John F. Kennedy. President Kennedy appointed Stevenson the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Stevenson had played a role in the United Nations since its beginning and had already won admiration from leaders of other countries for his intelligence and his ability to empathize with other viewpoints. During his years as ambassador to the UN, Stevenson dealt with a variety of issues and events, including violence in the Congo region of Africa and the war in Vietnam. Prior to his death, he was having secret meetings with UN Secretary General U Thant about initiating efforts to end the Vietnam War almost 10 years before it actually ended in 1974. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, he famously confronted the Soviet ambassador, Valerian Zorin, about the existence of Soviet missile sites in Cuba.
Let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no?
I should like to say
Продолжайте вашу речь, господин Стивенсон. В свое время вы получите ответ.
Mr. Stevenson, would you continue your statement, please? You will receive the answer in the due course. Do not worry.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision. And I'm also prepared to present the evidence in this room.
When Stevenson was able, he loved returning to the family farm here in what was then considered Libertyville. It was a refuge for him from his hectic political life. The farm, as he affectionately called it, was a place where he could come to think, write, and reflect. At the time, this was a working farm with gardens throughout the property and many different animals. Stevenson would take walks around the property, ride horses, ice skate, fish, and canoe on the Des Plaines River. While serving as ambassador to the UN in London, Adlai Stevenson suffered a heart attack and passed away on July 14, 1965. He was only 65 years old. But to this day, he remains an important historical figure because his words and ideas have left such a lasting legacy. He was a great observer of his time. Many of the issues that concerned him over 50 years ago still concern us today.
His great achievement was not political triumph or indeed triumph of any kind. His great achievement was the enrichment of his time by the nature of his relationships with his time. Archibald MacLeish. To the public dialogue of his time, he brought intelligence, civility, and grace. We who have been his contemporaries have been companions of greatness. The New York Times.
The Lake County Forest Preserve acquired the Stevenson House in 1974. In 2005 to 2006, the house and grounds were restored by the Lake County Forest Preserve District with grants from the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency and from the Save America's Treasures of the National Park Service, Department of the Interior program. The historic date of restoration is 1965, the year of Stevenson's death.
Let us be sure that our vision is high enough and broad enough, that it encompasses every single hope and dream of both the greatest and the humblest among us. I see an America where no man fears to think as he pleases or say what he thinks. I see an America where slums and tenements have vanished and children are raised in decency and self-respect. I see an America where men and women have leisure from toil, leisure to cultivate the resources of the spirit. I see an America where no man is another's master, where no man's mind is dark with fear. I see an America at peace with the world. I see an America as the horizon of human hopes. This is our design for the American cathedral, and we shall build it brick by brick and stone by stone, patiently, bravely, and prayerfully. And to those who say that the design defies our abilities to complete it, I answer, to act with enthusiasm and faith is the condition of acting greatly.